Why are walls going up around the U.S. Capitol and coming down around the country? No, Bernie's not right about Wall Street. And journalist Andy Ngo joins to talk about Antifa, incitement, and violence. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast. Mike Lindell of MyPillow likes to joke with me that I'm his top salesman, and I like to joke with him that Debbie and I are his top customers. Why? Because our house is full of MyPillow merchandise. You want to see something funny? Here are Debbie and I modeling. This is a new career for us, modeling the MyPillow robes, which are awesome. But Mike has all kinds of stuff, 110 products. He's got everything from sheets to towels to robes to throws. And he's offering buy one, get one free on his Giza Dream Sheets, which are available in a variety of colors. Like all of Mike's products, they have a 60-day money-back guarantee. They have a 10-year warranty. So right now, you can buy one, get one free on these amazing Giza Dream Sheets. Call 800-876-0227 and use promo code Dinesh. For a limited time, buy one, get one free. Call 800-876-0227. Check out all his other merchandise too. Or just go to mypillow.com, but just make sure to use promo code Dinesh.
America needs this voice. The times are crazy. In a time of confusion, division, and lies, we need a brave voice of reason, understanding, and truth. This is the Dinesh D'Souza podcast.
Walls are going up and walls are coming down. So now Washington, D.C. just doesn't look to be the kind of place it looked like when I worked there many years ago as a policy analyst in the Reagan administration. It was an open place. You could walk around. You could take pictures and you'd have the White House right behind you. You'd have the Capitol right behind you, but not now. Now there are tall fences. There's barbed wire. There is military and police everywhere. So the Capitol is becoming, you could almost say, an armed camp. Here's a report from the Capitol Police Chief, Pittman, and he goes, I can say unequivocally that vast improvements to the physical security infrastructure must be made to include permanent fencing and the availability of ready backup forces in close proximity to the Capitol. So this is not temporary. This is not to meet one incident. This is forever. We have a 3.2-mile barrier with razor wire and 7,000 troops currently in the Capitol. Now, what I find interesting is that while all this security is going up here, on the other side, at the U.S. border, circling the country, you may say the fences are coming down. And what I mean is that Biden has signed an executive order stopping the wall. No more wall. And no more wall basically means no wall at all. Why? Because half a wall is kind of like having no wall. It's obviously easy to just walk right around it, get right past it. Now, why the security at the Capitol? Why the fences? Why the walls? Nancy Pelosi gave her reason.
I do believe, and I have said this all along, that we will probably need a supplemental for more security for members when the enemy is within the House of Representatives.
So according to Pelosi, she has to protect against the enemy within. And the enemy within, according to her, isn't just Trump supporters. It's also Trump allies in Congress. She's worried about Congress people posing a threat to the Congress itself. So evidently the walls are intended for members as well as for ordinary U.S. citizens. Bottom line, the Democrats and the left in the Congress feels threatened, and they believe they really need a wall. But if they really need a wall, and if walls promote security, why not a wall around the United States? Don't the American people need protection? Don't they need a wall from people just storming in, not just people looking for work, but people looking to commit crimes, MS-13, gang members, bad guys, drug smugglers, and so on? Now, for really all 4 years of Trump, we kept hearing that walls don't work. No, Dinesh, Robert Frost, something there is that doesn't love a wall. And I have right in front of me this Frost poem, which really is about the deep ambivalence that people have about walls in general. In the poem, you have a guy who is building a wall, and his neighbor comes up to him and kind of starts railing about the wall and saying things like, we don't need walls, and walls are only meant to divide and keep us apart, and so on. And the grumpy neighbor who's building the wall just keeps saying one thing. He keeps saying, and he says it more than once, good fences make good neighbors. In other words, what he's saying is that far from undermining friendliness among neighbors, walls are essential. So you know what's yours, I know what's mine. There are certain lines, not that we can't cross them, but we cross them with consent before stepping onto, let's say, somebody else's property. We need to play by the rules. And when we look abroad, we know that walls have a mixed significance. Well, what about the Berlin Wall, Dinesh? Are you trying to build a Berlin Wall around the United States? No. The Berlin Wall was intended to keep people in Berlin, in other words, in communist East Germany, from getting out. The wall around the United States is to prevent aliens, people who are not citizens, from sneaking their way in and breaking their way in and breaking the law and jumping the line over immigrants from faraway countries who can't just swim the Rio Grande or scale a wall and get to the United States. So the wall is intended to enforce fair rules. I was at Stanford University giving a talk some years ago, and of course the Stanford leftists were all over me like, Dinesh, we don't need a wall around the United States. Look at Stanford. What an open campus this is. You can walk all around Palo Alto. People don't have to be Stanford students. They can come right onto the Stanford Green and walk around. Notice we don't have a wall. To which I replied, well, actually you do. You have a wall. And it's actually bigger than any wall that Trump could even aspire to build. It's a wall in your admissions office. You restrict who gets to get into Stanford. And you jealously guard that wall. In fact, I said, to my knowledge, not in the entire history of Stanford has anyone ever scaled that wall, by which I mean sneaked into Stanford as a legitimate student, attended classes and received credits, and graduated from Stanford, you may say, quote, illegally. That has never happened, which means they have a wall that no one can climb. And they jealously guard that wall so that the privileges of a Stanford degree are restricted to people that the admissions office has given their consent to. Now, where am I going with all this? Where I'm going is this. There's obviously a massive double standard in building a huge wall around the Capitol while taking the wall down around the country. And that really tells you who the political class cares about and whom they want to protect. So whom do they want to protect? Themselves. From whom? From you. You're the domestic enemy. You're the enemy within. You're whom Nancy Pelosi is referring to. You're the danger to the United States. So it's American citizens who pose a clear and present danger, and we need high walls and barbed wire and guns and troops to keep them out. Who's not a danger? Illegals. Who's not worthy of protection? The American people. Because the American people don't need a wall around their collective home, the United States. Why? Because the Democrats have their own political motives for letting people in. They want new voters. They want to change, you may almost say, the demographics, or even some people say the DNA of this country. They ultimately want to shift the balance of power so that they have, in effect, a one-party state. So walls are working for them in Washington, D.C., and the absence of a wall is also working for them politically around the country. If you're thinking of replacing your carpets due to pet stains and odors, you must try Genesis 950. The reviews are amazing. This is one product that actually works. With water, it breaks down the bonds of stains and odors so they are gone for good. Its antibacterial component removes pet odors from carpet and padding. It can be used in a carpet cleaning machine, and it's green so it's safe for your family and pets. Genesis 950 is made in America. If you're tired of pet cleaners that don't work, it's time to buy Genesis 950. 1 gallon of industrial strength Genesis 950 makes up to 7 gallons of cleaner. But Genesis 950 is also great for bathrooms, kitchens, floors, upholstery, and grease stains. Consider Genesis 950 before purchasing new carpets. Genesis 950 has great customer service. Order 1 gallon direct at genesis950.com to receive a free spray bottle, free shipping, and a $10 coupon code using the code Dinesh. That's genesis950.com. Coupon only available for 1 gallon purchase. Genesis 950. It's much cheaper than replacing your carpets. The battle goes on between the Reddit investors and the wolves of Wall Street. And what do we as conservatives think about these wolves of Wall Street? Of course, here's a little clip from the movie.
My name is Jordan Belfort. The year I turned 26, I made $49 million, which really pissed me off because it was 3 shy of $1 million a week.
So that's the portrait of Wall Street. And for many people in the country, that's kind of what Wall Street is. And obviously the characters in the movie are somewhat, taller and handsomer and have bigger eyes, and the people in Wall Street are short and squinty and kind of scary looking. But otherwise, it's a portrait of Wall Street as one big scam. And that, of course, is the view of Wall Street that comes from the left. Bernie Sanders basically says Wall Street is based on fraud. Now, as you know, in this battle between the Redditors and the Wall Streeters, I'm sort of on the side of the Redditors. I'm on the side of the rebels. So in this sense, it appears like I'm on the side of Bernie Sanders. I'm endorsing his portrait of Wall Street. These guys are a bunch of crooks. Well, is that what we think? I want to distinguish the Bernie critique of Wall Street from the conservative critique, from my critique. So the problem that Bernie has with Wall Street is that Wall Street is capitalist. That's what he hates about it. The problem I have with Wall Street is that there are elements of Wall Street that are anti-capitalist. So in other words, Bernie Sanders and I despise Wall Street not for the same reason, but for the opposite reason. Now, the generic hatred of Wall Street and stock exchanges in general on the left is an old tradition. It goes back to Marx. It actually goes back to Hitler. Here's a very interesting, this is a little segment out of my book, The Big Lie. It talks about Hitler early in his career. Hitler goes to a lecture by a German leftist economist named Gottfried Feder. And Feder draws a distinction between what he calls productive capitalism, things like, making clothes or factories that make goods, and what Feder calls finance capitalism. And basically what Feder is saying is that ordinary capitalism, productive capitalism, is done by healthy German people, and finance capitalism is done by Jews. So Hitler loves this. He's totally onto it. Here's Hitler's reaction. Right after listening to Feder's first lecture, the thought ran through my head that I had now found the way to one of the most essential premises for the foundation of a new party. Hitler's literally inspired by this. And then later, in 1920, Hitler gives a lecture, Why We Are Anti-Semites. And he basically associates the Jews with finance capitalism. He goes, the Jew is said to be gifted. His only gift is that of juggling with other people's property and swindling each and every one. Suppose I find by chance a picture that I believe to be a Titian by the artist Titian. I tell the owner what I think of it, and I offer him a price. In a similar case, the Jew begins by declaring that the picture is worthless. He buys it for a song and sells it at a profit of 5,000%. So notice that Hitler's depiction of Jews here is very similar to what you hear from AOC and Bernie Sanders about Wall Street. These people don't create any value. They're not making steel, Dinesh. They're simply engaging in a valueless industry. They're scam artists, every one of them. Now, let's back up and ask what is it that Wall Street actually does? Because Wall Street does very valuable things. when new businesses come into being, when whole new industries come into being, the tech industry, a communications revolution of the kind that we're living through today, with all these massive innovations and new products, who do you think finances those? Where does the money come from? According to Marx, it's the capitalist who puts up the money. The entrepreneur puts up the money, but no. Most entrepreneurs don't put up their own money. They have to go get money, and they get money from finance. They get money from venture capital firms. They get money from banks. They get money from Wall Street. So Wall Street is the grease, you may say, the oil that lubricates the machine of capitalism. And when it's working well, it does this job very well. And there have been legendary Wall Street investors who have been very shrewd and smart and accurate in calling the market. I remember, for example, Peter Lynch of the legendary Magellan Fund. And Peter Lynch would say he'd go to the mall, he'd get a little chair and sit there, and he'd just watch to see who walks into a particular store. And it could be teenagers walking into the Gap, or perhaps people walking into the Gap and walking right back out, which told him that the Gap is not making the kind of stuff that teenagers today want to buy. So Peter Lynch, through this just simple empirical observation, would draw certain provisional judgments about which companies were likely to do well. Now, other Wall Street firms go to great lengths. They will take photographs of the parking lots of stores and companies to see how many customers are in the store. They can't take pictures in the store, so they take photos of the parking lot. I know a major investor who does work through big data. He studies massive reams of data, all kinds of complex things that are going on in the economy, things that seem irrelevant, but when correctly analyzed, give you an idea of where the economy is moving and what to buy and what to sell and what not, and what to hold. So this is Wall Street working as it should. But there's a bunch of Wall Street guys that are also scam artists. When there's a lot of money in any industry, it attracts crooks. And these crooks are not capitalists. They're anti-capitalist. And what I mean by that is that they're gaming the system. So for example, this would be an example of gaming the system. You start buying a stock, but then you go on CNBC or MSNBC, and you start talking up the stock. Oh, that stock is going to do really well. Why? Because you just bought it. You want to drive the price up. And so your commentary, your analysis of the stock is really ultimately aimed at benefiting yourself. Or, as in this case, the Reddit case and companies like GameStop and so on, you basically get together with a bunch of your Wall Street hedge fund buddies and you start pressuring the Biden White House and you start pressuring the Treasury Department and pressuring the SEC to jump in and block trading. Why? Because you're losing money. And so you want to stick it to the Redditors, the independent traders with small amounts of money. It's the big guys conspiring against the little guys and blocking markets in order to achieve their goals. Now, of course, the big guys will say things like, well, the little guys are coordinating with each other. Yeah, but coordinating with each other in this way is completely legal. You recommend stocks on CNBC. Why can't they recommend stocks on their various Reddit boards? Why can't they recommend stocks on their Robinhood app? Why can't they talk about it the way you do? You have a bigger platform to talk about it. Bottom line, what I'm trying to get at is that when capitalism works well, it's a marvelous thing and we should defend it. But when capitalism is corrupted by people who are bending the rules, heads I win, tails you lose, working in league with the government, establishing monopolies, shutting out other players in the market, gaming the system, this is the kind of capitalism or anti-capitalism that both Bernie and I could agree is very, very bad. In the first episode of my new podcast, I emphasized there's a desperate need for trust and for truth. At this time in history, we're in a battle for truth. This is a time for strengthening our faith in our worldview. Whether we realize it or not, our worldview is constantly being shaped and formed by what we hear, read, and choose to believe. Our worldview informs our personal, social, and political lives. It helps us understand our purpose. So I'd like to recommend an insightful book to you called Reflections on the Existence of God by bestselling author Richard Simmons III. He writes on topics like wisdom, life, death, sex, truth. Reflections on the Existence of God is a collection of short essays that tackles the biggest question of all. Does God exist? The book is well-researched, easy to read, and is now a bestseller on Amazon. Former White House aide Wallace Henley says, "I've taught apologetics for many years. Of all the books on apologetics, Simmons is the best I've ever read." If you want to challenge yourself to spiritual and intellectual growth, I encourage you right now to get your copy of Reflections on the Existence of God by Richard Simmons III. Visit reflectionsdinesh.com to learn more about the book and get exclusive access to the entire first chapter for free. Go to reflectionsdinesh.com now. That's reflectionsdinesh.com. In this ongoing battle between the bigwigs on Wall Street and, you may say, the little wigs at Reddit, I've talked about the psychology of Wall Street, but now I want to turn to the psychology of the rebels, because it seems to me that these rebels aren't, they are in the financial world very equivalent to something that we see in the political world. There is a certain sensibility here that's very important for us to understand. Now, a lot of commentary on this doesn't understand this at all. Here is an article by Jeff Summer in the New York Times. It's called How to Keep Your Cool in the Game Stock Market, and it's full of all the usual bromides about the gains of these stocks had, quote, nothing to do with the merits. Trading in stocks like GameStop is the last thing people should be doing, says Richard Bernstein, a former investment analyst at Merrill Lynch. For many people, this can end badly. This can only end badly, says Professor Moalemi of Columbia Business School. Now, and then of course the author talks about, Jeff Summer talks about, the extreme volatility is reminiscent of the tulip mania in 17th century Holland. So this guy is the kind of guy who is responding by saying, in effect, you people don't know, you don't understand investing. You're not going to make money at this. This is not the right way to go about it. But of course, this has nothing to do with the real motives of the rebels. The rebels are not about maximizing their returns. They're about teaching some very bad people a very bitter lesson. Now, a much closer to the truth analysis comes from actually CNN. What? This must be a mistake. But it's peppered with the usual ideological flavor. How Trumpism explains the GameStop stock surge. And the basic idea here, interesting idea, is that Trump is gone, but Trumpism remains. And Trumpism, according to this article, is sort of a certain kind of populist nihilism. Nihilism is the key word here. And we're hearing that word a lot these days. Here's a Nebraska Senator, Ben Sasse. Don't let nihilists become your drug dealers. Don't let them be your prophets. He's actually referring to the insurgents at the Capitol. He's calling them nihilists. And here's former SEC Commissioner Laura Unger linking the events that are going on with GameStop and Reddit on the one hand with the January 6th, quote, uprising at the Capitol. Listen.
It really puts a lot of question about the integrity of the market, right? And it really kind of, everybody's scratching their heads over this. What should happen? What is the right thing to do to control this or stop this? Not unlike what we saw on January 6th at the Capitol, right? If you don't have the police in there at the right time, things go a little crazy. And that's kind of feels like what's happening with this. Much different, much lesser degree. It's financial harm, not personal bodily harm. But certainly that's the same kind of, platform created frenzy that people are operating under. And these are very trying times.
So this is the predictable reaction of the establishment. Oh, the natives are getting restless. The peasants are coming with their pitchforks, and whether they're doing it on their computers at Reddit, or whether they're doing it by coming to the Capitol, they're very dangerous. We need the cops. Where are the cops when we need them? By the way, this is coming from the same people who were talking just a few weeks ago about defunding the police. But the question I want to ask is a deeper one. Who are these so-called nihilists? Here's an article by a professor of Russian literature. Dostoevsky warned of the strain of nihilism that infects Donald Trump and his movement. She calls Trump the arch-nihilist, and she goes, a range of nihilistic justifications seems to have shaped the violence at the U.S. Capitol. And the same thing could be said about the Redditors, that they're nihilists, that they don't really believe in the logic of markets. They don't accept that there's a rational underpinning of markets. Now, I think in a way the appeal to Dostoevsky here is very interesting and significant, because Dostoevsky, perhaps more than anyone else, penetrated the roots of nihilism. Now, on the philosophical front, that was done by the philosopher Nietzsche, who talked about nihilism. But let's look at Nietzsche for just a moment, because by nihilism, Nietzsche didn't mean what people think he meant. Nihilism doesn't just mean nothingness, because you'll be really hard-pressed to find anyone in the world who believes in nothingness, pure and simple. Most people believe in something. They may not believe in what you believe in, but they believe in something else. And for Nietzsche, the issue of nihilism was just this. It wasn't that people didn't have values. It was that values had lost their transcendent grounding. In other words, values could no longer be anchored, let's say, for example, in the idea of a transcendent God, or the idea of a transcendent moral code. This is the real meaning of Nietzsche's phrase, God is dead, which is that when God dies, or people really cease to believe in God, then all the values that came out of that, for example, the sanctity of human life, the idea of compassion, the idea that we're of universal brotherhood, all those ideas, says Nietzsche, now begin to be free-floating. They are not given. They have to be, you may almost say, chosen. Now, Dostoevsky picks up this theme of nihilism. I think what's very interesting about it is that he presents nihilism not as a rejection of values, but as a rejection of alien values that are imposed on people. Alien values that are seen as corrupt. So Dostoevsky was writing against the background of massive westernization in Russia that had been introduced by Peter the Great. And so suddenly in Russia, you have all these Western ideas and customs that have come in, almost come in like a massive waterfall. I mean, I'm talking about people walking around in French outfits and eating marshmallows and speaking about Rousseau and speaking about Locke. And suddenly the Russian people and the Russian peasants were like, what country are we living in? Who are these people? Where did this way of life suddenly come and become, you may say, superimposed on us? And ordinary people begin to feel like aliens in their own country. They feel like strangers in their own land. They become uprooted, deracinated, lost. And their nihilism is a rejection of authority. It's a rejection of the newly established values. But it's not a rejection of values per se. In fact, it's an effort to bring down what are seen as these corrupt establishment values that pretend and preen and pose as being the most wonderful, enlightened, modern values in the world, but actually these are values that are tyrannical. They kill real feelings. They undermine and uproot communities. They separate families. They are morally corrupting. So this is the world that Dostoevsky writes about. And I think this is essential to understand what is motivating people who go to Washington, D.C., desperate, angry, and say, let me go, let me kind of push my way into the Capitol so I can talk to my representative at least. Let me at least be heard. And the same thing is true with the Reddit investors. They're like, you know what? We're going to put the little money we have in our little account at risk because we have to take down these bad guys who have gamed the system, who have set it up so that they win no matter what. They're essentially pretending to play in the casino, but they're the ones who are in league with the house. So this is what the revolt really is. And nihilism, as Dostoevsky concludes, takes on a certain kind of quality of holiness, of a crusade, of requiring moral commitment and even courage. There's a great scene in Crime and Punishment where Raskolnikov, the young student, is sitting in a cafe and he's hearing a military officer talk to a student. And of course, the student is the nihilist and he's telling the military officer, I'm going to strike out against the system. I'm going to find someone, a representative of this corrupt establishment, and I'm going to take him on and I'm going to kill that person. And the military officer says, are you going to actually carry this out? And the student is very timid and goes, no, I'm just talking. I'm just exchanging ideas. The student, in other words, is a big talker but lacks courage. And Raskolnikov, sitting at the next table, thinks, well, I think the same thing. I'm with the student. The only difference is the student is a wimp. The student lacks courage. I need to have the courage to carry out this nihilistic project. And this is what sets Raskolnikov off on this desperate and tragic murder of a landlady that is the plot of Crime and Punishment. So, bottom line, nihilism springs out of the roots of alienation, the roots of a corrupt financial and political system in league with each other that crushes human aspirations and human feelings. In this respect, I am emotionally on the side of the nihilist, not because I don't believe in anything, but because I don't believe in this corrupt alliance of money and politics that is reflected both in Wall Street and in the US Capitol. You never thought COVID could cost you your home, right? It just might, because cybercrime is up 75%. And by far the most serious cybercrime to worry about is home title theft. The job of the criminals is easier than you think. The title documents to our homes are now online. The thief finds your home's title, forges your signature on a quitclaim deed stating you sold your home to him. Then he takes out loans on your home and leaves you in debt. You won't know until late payment or eviction notices arrive. Insurance doesn't cover you, and neither do common identity theft programs. That's why I protect my home with Home Title Lock. The instant Home Title Lock detects someone tampering with my home's title, they help shut it down. Go to HometitleLock.com and register your address to see if you're already a victim. Then use code RADIO to receive 30 free days of protection. That's code RADIO at HometitleLock.com. HometitleLock.com. Journalist Andy Ngo is one of the brave men in America, and he's also one of the last of the true journalists left in America, because Andy, along with a few others, have been documenting and chronicling the deeds and misdeeds of Antifa. And Andy now has a new book coming out Tuesday. Here it is, Unmasked. Inside Antifa's radical plan to destroy democracy. I'm just diving into it. It's fascinating, Andy. It pulls you into a whole world that if you were just following the national media, you wouldn't even know existed. Why do you think that mainstream journalists are so reluctant to cover Antifa? They pretend, in a sense, they give fuel to Joe Biden's absurd statement that Antifa is merely an idea, as if to say it's a theory without any concrete manifestation on the ground. What's going on here?
Well, it's no surprise to you and your listeners and viewers that the mainstream journalists and the legacy media have been really overtaken by people who are liberal and on the left. Now, the issue that arises with Antifa is that they had a mutual enemy in the Trump administration in 2016, believing either through ignorance or actually through just zealotry that this was a sign of ascendant American fascism. So what I saw and I write about in the book is media willingly or unwillingly working hand in hand to propagate and mainstream tenets of Antifa's ideology. So they do provide some coverage of Antifa, but when they do, they call them anti-fascists who are opposing the far right and neo-Nazis without mentioning their acts of domestic terrorism against citizens, against the state, against property. I think you can look at the disparate coverage, particularly in how the rioters on the 6th of January in the Capitol Hill siege, how they have been portrayed in the press versus the rioters in Portland, Oregon, where I'm from, who for more than 120 days tried to actually did set fire to property that was inhabited by law enforcement and city staff, came with explosives and knives and guns to riot night after night.
Now, people would say, wait a minute, Andy, wait a minute, Dinesh, in the Capitol, 5 people died in this insurgency. Now, I think it's important to zoom into these 5 people because one of them, Ashley Babbitt, was shot in the neck by a policeman. As I understand it, 3 other people had medical conditions, and they were all among the so-called insurgents or protesters. They died. 1 policeman died, and it was initially reported that he had been hit on the head with a fire extinguisher, but those reports have been questioned, and his own family, as I've seen has challenged this account and basically said that's not what happened, and we just want to keep this matter private. Bottom line, it looks like, even though AOC has been going around saying that she was in terror of her life and people were out to kill her and she was on the verge of being murdered, the truth of the matter is that the deaths were all on the side of the protesters. Now, I only say this by way of background. How would you compare this level of violence, and I would say incitement, to Trump incitement? You know, let's march on the Capitol, let's be peaceful and patriotic. That was allegedly Trump's incitement. Talk about the violence and incitement on the Antifa side and on the part of leading Democrats.
Yeah, I wonder why people's memories are so short. You know, I've been very clear in my condemnation of the political violence that happened on the 6th of January, and it was deadly, and people died needlessly for that. However, the riots that occurred throughout America last year by BLM and Antifa, allegedly in the name of racial justice, more than 24 people died there, and some of them were killed by murderers. In my city, in Portland, the riots, at the height of them, at the end of August, an Antifa militant actually sought out a Trump supporter in downtown Portland and shot him in cold blood and fled to a different state before being killed by federal authorities. So I wonder why the lives of the people who were lost last year don't seem to matter to those who are now talking about how serious everything was on the 6th of January, which it was, but be consistent, and they're not, which is why their condemnations are hollow.
Andy, we have seen in Europe, you have to go back almost a century, paramilitaries which arose as the sort of street gangs, but these weren't just loafers or random people on the street. What you really had is these paramilitaries were attached to political parties. So, for example, the black shirts to Mussolini's Socialist Party, the brown shirts to Hitler's National Socialist Party. Would it be an exaggeration to say that Antifa and perhaps to a certain degree BLM are the paramilitary wing of the Democratic Party?
I'm reluctant to call it that. However, I think it's important for you to look at the historical context of how a militant movement and organizations like Antifa rise up. And I appreciate that in your documentaries, you talk about the history from the 20th century. This is important. You don't have groups like Antifa just coming out of the blue. They're extremely organized, and they also follow a certain legacy, direct lineage to the paramilitary, the German Communist Party in interwar years. So there's precedent to their political violence, to the brawling on the streets, to attacking political opponents for wrong thing. And the important thing to mention about the original Antifa, the paramilitary of the German Communist Party, is that the people they called fascists, they didn't just call Nazis fascists, that's obvious. They actually targeted with violence the Social Democrats, the center-left party. So from its inception to today, this label of fascist has always just been used to mean any person or institution or group that opposes their political extremist ideology.
Now, Andy, I finally have to congratulate you because in a brilliant book marketing move, you have evidently orchestrated Antifa protests against your book. They mobilized at the Powell's, the kind of legendary bookstore in Portland. And I was looking at the way that Powell's was sort of responding to that. Now, I can only imagine this is going to help your book sales, which I think is wonderful because you're beating them at their own game. But talk a little bit about how they've been trying to ban your book and how they've actually seemingly successfully terrorized some bookstores into submission.
The contemporary book burning is not through literal fires and throwing books in there. It's actually to make it so that people cannot purchase or access information. We've seen it happening in academia for going back several years now, and now it's targeted specifically at bookstores and libraries, places that are supposed to be neutral places. So Powell's, as you mentioned, is one of the largest independent bookstores in the world. And in response to those who are calling for my book to be banned weeks before release, Powell's said that they were not going to sell it on its store shelves, but they would still have it available on its online catalog. But you can never appease Antifa or the far left anytime you give them an inch to take a mile. So naturally, they turned up, rioted in front of the flagship store in downtown, forced the business to shut down on 2 days. Through all this, I have sympathy for PALs, even though they defamed me and called me somebody who incites violence. I have sympathy for them because they are in the middle of a city where militants who promise to carry out acts of violence and arson do carry out those promises.
Andy, thank you for coming on the podcast, folks. I want to tell you that this is really a fascinating book. I'm just essentially plunging into the water myself into it, and it just draws you into a riveting world that Andy is now fully comprehends and situates in a historical context. One way to strike out against these book cancelers is to go get Andy's book. Prove that they don't beat us at this kind of a game, and show Andy that we support his work, which is vital work. We wouldn't be knowing the stuff we do about Antifa and these domestic terrorist operations if there weren't guys like Andy, and he's not the only one. There are many other great guys doing the same kind of work. These are the journalists of our day. Thank you very much, Andy Ngo. Look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.
Mike Lindell of MyPillow has clearly become a cultural icon. And I say that because I just saw a clip that's trying to make fun of him, trying to mock him on Saturday Night Live.
This week, Twitter continued its crackdown on voter fraud misinformation by banning Mike Lindell, the CEO of MyPillow and a vocal supporter of President Trump. Here to comment is Mike Lindell.
Well, hey, thanks there, Colin. Yes, it's me, Mike Lindell, the inventor of MyPillow. And thank you all so much for making MyPillow the #1 pillow in America.
So they're obviously trying to mock Mike Lindell. But here's something to keep in mind, and this is why some of this mockery always backfires. You cannot make a joke about somebody unless they are super famous. Try to imagine making a joke about the guy who's the announcer. You can't make a joke about him because nobody knows who he is. But everybody knows who Mike Lindell is. And we know that Mike Lindell is a patriot, he's a Christian, and the reason they're making fun of him is for those reasons. Now, we need to support Mike. Mike's one of us, and Mike has paid a price for his beliefs, and he's not backing down, which I love about him. He also makes great merchandise, 110 different products all over his website. You can get deep discounts up to 60% on all of them. Here's how you do it. You call 800-876-0227 and use promo code Dinesh. 800-876-0227, or just go to mypillow.com. But just make sure to avail yourselves of the discounts, and to do that, use promo code Dinesh. FBI attorney Kevin Clinesmith has been sentenced for his corrupt conduct in the case involving General Flynn. He received no prison, probation for a year, a modest fine, $100, and community service, 400 hours. This is literally unbelievable. And I can't help by looking at it in the context of my own case. I mention this because it's important for justice to be even-handed. Our cases aren't similar, but when I say they aren't similar, what I mean is his is vastly more serious. His offense doesn't even compare with mine in that regard, and yet he receives a vastly lighter penalty. Compare my penalty. 8 months of forced overnight confinement in a confinement center with hardened criminals, a $30,000 fine, mandatory psychiatric counseling, and literally thousands of hours of community service. And it's only the last part that was interrupted by the Trump pardon. I actually performed and did all the rest. Now, let's look at these offenses a little bit more closely, because in my case, I gave $20,000 of my own money to a political candidate. In Clinesmith's case, he took an application being submitted to the FISA court for surveillance, and he altered it in order to get the surveillance permission and make it easier to get General Flynn. So in my case, I gave money. In his case, he was more like the cop who was planting evidence on a suspect because he, quote, knows he did it, or he feels the guy's a bad guy, I want to get him anyway. Now notice that when I did my offense, I was a private citizen trying to help a friend in college from my college years. Clinesmith was a man in authority. He is in a position of public trust. He's working for the FBI. The FISA court relies on the accuracy of these applications. And if an application is doctored or altered by an FBI lawyer, that is a much greater violation of a public trust than a private citizen giving money. The impact of my offense was trivial. The candidate that I gave money to was 40 points behind in the polls. I knew she was unlikely to win, and she didn't win. And so the impact on society was virtually nil. The impact of Clinesmith's alteration was the increased probability that an innocent man, Flynn, would be now more likely to be surveilled and convicted. So in other words, here is an officer of the law corrupting the process of going after someone in a criminal case, which could result in that man losing his freedom, losing his liberty. So why then the disparate results or sentencing? The answer is really simple. In my case, it was a Clinton appointee judge, a left-winger, Judge Richard Berman, who wanted to stick it to me, teach me a lesson. He was in league with the prosecution to that degree. This was an ideological hit. And in Clinesmith's case, he got a Democratic judge, Obama appointee, somebody who basically saw Clinesmith as doing something. Even in the sentencing, you could see the judge kind of sympathetically nodding, oh yeah, of course, this has all been very hard on you, Mr. Clinesmith. So you've got a judge who's basically looking to let the guy go, almost like some of these left-wing judges in Portland that deal with Antifa defendants. So at the end of the day, how can one believe in equal justice under the law when cases are treated this way? Justice isn't just a matter of did you do it. It's also a matter of how does your penalty compare to other people who did things that are just as, if not more, grievous. Penalty should fit the crime. I think in my case, the penalty exceeded the crime. And in Clinesmith's case, he essentially got no penalty, virtually no penalty, and he's gotten away with his crime. Want to belong to a senior organization you can trust? I want you to know about AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. AMAC is the fastest growing conservative 50-plus organization in America. Over 2 million people have joined and now carry the AMAC membership card. AMAC was built by folks who feel the same way we do. We are not alone. AMAC believes in and stands up for the values that have made America great: faith, family, and freedom. They believe in the sanctity of our Constitution, including the First and Second Amendments. They're fighting the good fight against reckless government spending and the ever-expanding scope of the federal government. They are pro-small business, secure borders, support our military, and respect our veterans. AMAC works hard to deliver real value to their members, providing the best benefits, discounts, and services you can find in one place. I want you to join AMAC today. Debbie and I are lifetime members. Go to amac.us and join now. Join AMAC today. The website again, amac.us. Just recently, the fashion giant Sephora severed its ties with a young influencer, Amanda Ensing. And their reasons for doing it was that young Amanda was in violation of their policies of inclusion and diversity. Translation, young Amanda is a conservative, a patriot, and a Christian. I'm very happy to have Amanda Ensing on the podcast. Amanda, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's great to have you. And Tell a little bit about how, from quite modest beginnings, you were able to build a successful business in the area of makeup and fashion and develop a relationship with Sephora, among other companies.
Sure. So I grew up in a very small town in Tennessee, and coincidentally, my town, they opened up a Sephora, and I'd never heard of Sephora. I'd only shopped at Walmart and CVS my entire life, and I thought, wow, so many brands. I want to learn about all the brands, how to use the new makeup. So I took to the internet. I took to YouTube. This was 9 years ago, and I literally typed into YouTube best foundation, and I went down the rabbit hole of the very first beauty influencers. I loved it so much that I said, I have to get on this. I want to start filming myself. So I didn't have a camera. I didn't have lighting. I worked 2 jobs just to pay for college and everything else. So all I had was my laptop. I would stack up my books in front of the window. I had the daylight as my lighting, and I started filming my process of learning how to do makeup. People started watching it. They started to enjoy, I didn't have a lot of money, so I could only afford drugstore makeup, and I would get samples at Sephora, and people enjoyed that. And as I was graduating my senior year, I hit 20,000 subscribers on YouTube, and I got my first sponsorship from a company that said, we will pay you $250 for a video. And I thought, I didn't know people made money. So I replied, I said $500 and you got a deal. And from there on out, I got my degree in political science and business administration. I was preparing for law school. I ditched my plans for law school, and I started doing YouTube and social media full time, and you couldn't stop me.
Now, you were on the Sephora influencer list, and then suddenly you got a sort of abrupt notification that in effect severed relations with you. Now, how did that come about? Were there leftists who were complaining about you to Sephora? Was Sephora reacting to something, or did they take this on their own initiative? What happened?
So I've worked with Sephora several times over my career. This was the first time I partnered with them through a third-party called Reward Style. So they reached out, wanted to work with me. When I went through the contract, there was a clause saying Sephora could opt out, cancel, and not pay me. I've never signed a contract like that in my 9 years in this industry. I raised concerns, and Reward Style said, don't worry, we do not discriminate based off of political and religious backgrounds, because I told them in the email, which I show in my full Instagram video statement, that I get heat for my conservative and Christian views. So once the video went up, Sephora told Reward Style, who told me via email, Sephora loves the video. It was great. So a few hours later, I start getting hate from liberals on Sephora's page saying, in particular, the first one that went viral said, Amanda Ensing is part of a dangerous MAGA group, which Sephora replied, thanks for bringing it to our attention. We have disaffiliated. It does not align with Sephora's values of inclusivity. And from then on out, I got blown up with emails from Reward Style saying Sephora is demanding it to take it down. They also demanded I take it down by midnight on Friday. And then when I didn't, obviously my voice can't be bought, my values can't be bought. On Saturday, I received another email from Reward Style's legal team saying we will pay her if she signs a settlement to stay quiet and not talk about anything. And they've given us no reason so far of why, just the clause.
And did you take that settlement? And if you didn't, why not?
I did not take the settlement. I told them, my legal team told them on Friday that I would happily take the video down if they paid me in full. I would never sign anything that would silence or censor my voice. My followers and my integrity always comes first, and it's my duty and my responsibility to tell them what these brands are doing. Ever since I became vocal last November about my conservative views, I've been called homophobic, racist, white supremacist, not Latina anymore, everything, just because I am conservative and Christian.
Now, what do you make of the sort of irony, Amanda, where they talk about inclusion and diversity, but somehow you, a conservative Latina, are not included in that diversity? You're not part of it. Somehow the diversity is mobilized against you and becomes a pretext or excuse to kick you off their platform.
I think that silencing over half the nation due to political and or religious views is hypocrisy. I think it's the opposite of unity. And even on the influencer side, I have had big influencers attack me, mock me for my faith, smear my character, tell me I'm no longer Latina and they don't claim me or I'm not because of my conservative views. But these brands continue to work with them. If you're a liberal, it's fine. But the moment you talk about your conservative values and your Christian values, they no longer, everyone has walked away from me in my industry over the last couple of months. And I think silencing over half of the nation is the opposite of diversity and inclusivity.
what is your way, Amanda, of fighting back against this? Is it simply a matter of you won't back down, you'll speak out, or do you have a bigger plan for how to come out ahead in this regrettable, and I would just say this disgusting episode?
Yes, first and foremost, everyone can use their voice. I will continue to use my voice. The more they try to silence and censor us, the louder I will become. Personally, I want to make makeup great again. I want to create an industry and create a space where everyone is included, everyone's voice is heard despite their backgrounds. I personally have been working on my beauty brand for a little over 2 years, and we are set to launch hopefully late spring. So I can't wait to have my voice be heard even loud. Conservatives, Christians, we aren't going anywhere, and we are going to build our own spaces that include everyone, because what Sephora and these brands are doing and these influencers are doing is not the way of the future. We want to include everyone.
Amanda, I got to say, this is downright awesome to hear that you're not just becoming a critic of Sephora, but you are also saying, hey, why don't we start our own brands? Why don't we have our own products that are not dependent upon the say-so of these characters? And besides, I also want to tell people, one very effective way to speak your mind, go on the Sephora website, because on Sephora's website, you can not only comment, you can review their products. And that's an excellent place to give Sephora a piece of your mind, to let them know what you think about what's happened to Amanda Ensing, and to let them know what you think of their bogus diversity and inclusion policies, which are obviously instruments not of inclusion, but of discrimination. Amanda, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you for having me and all the support. It means so much to me. God bless you guys. Thank you.
We're now at the mercy of one-party control and an agenda driven by tax and spend economics. I don't need to get into all the ramifications, but fiscally expect compounded growth of our national debt and the systematic devaluation of the US dollar. So here's the question. What's your plan? What are you doing right now to protect your savings and your retirement? I'm excited to have Birch Gold Group as an advertiser, because Birch Gold Group will help you diversify a portion of your savings, an IRA or eligible 401k, into an IRA backed by gold and silver. They are the premier precious metals IRA company in America, with an A+ Better Business Bureau rating, countless 5-star reviews, and thousands of satisfied customers. There's a tidal wave of inflation coming. Gold is your hedge. Debbie and I are investing through Birch Gold, and you should too. Text Dinesh to 484848 for your free information kit on precious metals IRA, or to speak with a Birch Gold representative today. Time is running out, but you can protect your savings now. Text Dinesh to 484848. I've long been puzzled by CNN's Brian Stelter, the host of a show somewhat ironically called Reliable Sources. Reliable Sources. Now, when I first encountered Stelter, with his, Pillsbury Doughboy look, his Mike Tyson voice, I had a little difficulty believing that this was a real person. And then once I listened to Stelter, his, circuitous, incoherent rants, initially I thought, this guy's gotta be on drugs. Puff the Magic Dragon. But then I waited for the stupor to pass, for Stelter to kind of return to normal, but he never did. So I was forced to come up with a kind of new theory on Stelter, and here is my current one. Stelter is the classic propagandist for the 21st century. Listen.
It's as predictable as the sunrise. Democrats win elections, and then Republicans say they are being silenced. But while some cry cancel culture, let me suggest a different way to think about this. A harm reduction model. Most people want clean air and blue skies, and accurate news and rational views. And then in that healthy environment that looks beautiful, then we can have great fights about taxes and regulation and healthcare and all the rest. The vast majority of people can agree that disinformation about, let's say, the pandemic is unhealthy. It's harmful. So how can that harm be reduced? Well, big tech platforms say they are removing lies about vaccines and stamping out Stop the Steal BS and QAnon cult content. Now, do these private companies have too much power? Sure. And many people would say yes, of course they do. But reducing a liar's reach is not the same as censoring freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is different than freedom of reach.
Now, the first thing to realize is that this is very modern, quite different from the old style of propaganda, 20th century propaganda. the old stuff doesn't work today. So imagine a socialist dictator auditioning today for a propagandist. Bring in Goebbels. So Goebbels comes in. Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Biden. Nah, it doesn't really work. It's too shrill. It scares people. Okay, the dictator says, let's try this new guy. What's his name? Stelter. Okay, Stelter. So Stelter comes in. Hello. That's the thing about Stelter. He's unthreatening. His voice alone suggests emasculation. He reminds me of the eunuchs that were used in the Persian and Mughal courts. The emperors loved the eunuchs because they were vicious, but they dressed and talked like women. Hello. That's Stelter. Plus, he packages tyranny in euphemistic terms. He makes it sound very soft, almost appealing. We're not taking away your freedom of speech, just your freedom of reach. We're not against debate. We just think debates are very divisive. We're totally in favor of debates on issues on which there's total unanimity. But there is a dangerous element here. From history, we know where this kind of language can go. We're not taking away your head, just separating it from the rest of your body. Stelter might look harmless, but his propaganda is not harmless. What should we do with this guy? I recommend that CNN limit his reach, which is, of course, completely distinguishable from taking away his freedom of speech. Got problems with the IRS? I got to tell you about a time not so long ago when the big bad US government tried to make an example out of me. And I know firsthand the importance of having proper representation to protect your freedom as well as your finances from being taken by the IRS. Ryan Danica and the Christian folks at South Coast Tax will discuss your unique situation and create a tailored framework of how to attack the situation head-on with the IRS and allow you a true fresh start. South Coast Tax has a settlement average of 3 cents on the dollar, or 97% reduction rate, along with an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. With 20 years of experience, Ryan told me that he has yet to see a tax situation that has stumped him. And that's pretty impressive considering the size of the tax laws. Call Ryan at 800-TAX-3156 or check out their website, southcoasttaxresolution.com. And you'll see for yourself it will be the best move you ever made and the first step in getting your financial freedom back. That's 800-TAX-3156. So guys, I'm entering month number 2 of this podcast. I started January 11th. So this is week number 4. And it's really fun. It's a lot of work, but it's fun for Debbie, my producer, wife, and me. We work together on this, and the podcast reflects our joint effort. And I love that you are listening and you are watching, and we're getting such a fantastic reaction. The podcast is already huge. It's one of the biggest in the country. And thank you for that. Thank you for devoting your precious time each day to listening to me and watching me. And please share the podcast with others, because I want the podcast to be a powerful forum and a voice, not just for understanding, but figuring out ways in which we can fight back in the culture and in politics, establish our own beachheads, our own institutions. And I'm going to try to profile people on the podcast who are doing that. I also want to encourage you to send in questions. I love hearing from you, and periodically I will try to answer questions on a pretty regular basis on the podcast. Go to questiondinesh@gmail.com. That's the email. And you can send a written question, but you can also send an audio question. Just record the question and keep it brief, because it's easier to play if it's brief. Record a pointed question on your phone and then just send it in as an email. questiondinesh@gmail.com.
Subscribe to the Dinesh D'Souza podcast on Apple, Google, and Spotify, or watch on Rumble, YouTube, and salemnow.com.